I will be discussing some strange things with you, a bit dark, a bit creepy. Actually, not just a bit, quite terrifying. I will talk about how science can sometimes be used for malicious purposes. Of course, it's not science's fault. It's the story of evil individuals who want to achieve their sinister goals by using science. Let's get into the topic without further ado. First, I'll talk about eugenics, and in connection with that, I'll delve into the theory of evolution, social Darwinism, concentration camps, Hitler, and the once widely accepted concept of the superior race, which extends into a dark history. So if you'd like, grab a cup of coffee before we start. And sit back. Let's start with eugenics. To set the foundation for the story, eugenics is generally defined as follows. All activities aimed at improving the quality of human genes fall under the scope of eugenics. The goal is to improve the quality of human genes. Think of a similar concept that we see in animals. For instance, manipulating the genes of dogs to produce breeds with specific traits. Specific breeds are bred, as you might know. Now, imagine this being applied to humans, the weak being sterilized or worse, eliminated. This is precisely what eugenics is. You've probably thought of several names and examples from history. I will talk about those. Stay tuned. Let's step back a bit in history to the origins of everything, up until the 4th century BC, to Plato. He was the one who first introduced this idea. While it might not be exactly eugenics, he advocated for the increase of healthy and strong individuals through state intervention. And leaders who supported this idea, drawing from here, well, they went on to commit numerous atrocities using this as a societal norm. Civilizations like the Spartans or the Romans. If you've watched the film 300, you might remember that Spartan children were left in the wilderness, and unfortunately the weak ones were eliminated. In their view, this would lead to the creation of a strong race. However, the formal theoretical development and inclusion of this idea into literature would happen in the 19th century. The person behind this theory was Francis Galton. Do you know who Francis Galton was? He was the cousin of Charles Darwin. Oh my! Yes, indeed. Let me tell you something even more peculiar. The origin of the idea of eliminating the weak stems from Darwin's theory of evolution. So, even though it's quite indirect, Darwin is also implicated in the Holocaust, although he was always trying to convey something quite different. When we talk about the theory of evolution, we refer to natural selection. It's interpreted as the survival of the fittest. However, Darwin was actually talking about survival of the most adaptable, species that adapt best to their environment, rather than just the strongest. Now, taking his cousin's theory, Galton thought, if natural selection exists, why not artificial selection? Can't we accelerate this process? Let's sterilize and even kill the weak. Let only the strong breed. We'll see the results in a few generations. And he called this super fast natural selection. Meanwhile, Darwin was upset, quite angry. He stated that Galton misunderstood him, that this selection process should naturally progress, that nature knows best, and that no state, power, or human values can trample over the right to life. Darwin stood by this until he passed away, but Galton was waiting for Darwin's death. In 1882, just a year after Charles Darwin's death, in 1883, he wrote the book in which he coined the concept of eugenics. We can clearly see this approach being legalized and organized in the first quarter of the 20th century in America. Eugenic centers were even established with government support. However, the most striking example, as I'm sure you've already guessed, was witnessed in Nazi Germany. The scientific foundation that the Nazis relied on to create the Aryan race was none other than eugenics. By controlling natural development and accelerating the process, they aim to reach their dream of a superior race, the Übermensch. But before delving into this in more detail, let's take a look at the picture in America. Englishman Francis Galton had received the title Sir due to his work in various scientific fields, by the way. But this work was his most influential. He harboured a dream of creating a superior race in England. However, this dream didn't find much support in his own country. Yet in various countries around the world, it would go on to affect the fates of millions of people in a horrendous way. Firstly, in the United States, a civil law was enacted in 1896 in the state of Connecticut. According to this law, individuals suffering from epilepsy or mental illness were strictly prohibited from getting married. In 1911, a race improvement organization was established, and for the first time, a pedigree system was initiated. And guess who started it? John Harvey Kellogg. Does the name sound familiar? Kellogg's, yes. John Harvey Kellogg was also a nutritionist and entrepreneur. Quite a journey from where he started, isn't it? With the establishment of this institution and practice, national conferences were held in 1914, 1915, and 1928, essentially launching a national movement. In this context, eugenics registration offices were established to further organize their efforts. Families and genetic traits were tracked within these offices. Based on the collected data, reports were published identifying groups that were deemed incompatible and weak. Unsurprisingly, these weak races were predominantly immigrants, minorities, and the poor. After 1919, relying on all this data, organized sterilization practices were first introduced, especially in the state of California. Between 1919 and 1979, according to official records from mental hospitals, around 20,000 individuals were sterilized against their will. This was believed to protect future generations from mental illnesses. As you might expect, the majority of these sterilizations were performed on minorities, and the practice that started in California later spread to 39 other states. The authorities appointed by the government determined who was weak and shouldn't reproduce. In 1927, the American Supreme Court shockingly declared that these sterilizations did not violate the Constitution in any way. One of the judges, Oliver Wendell Holmes, even stated, "We have to deal with these imbeciles, enough as it is." It can be comfortably said that many of the politicians of that time, while combating scarcity and economic hardship, were in fact implementing policies to prevent the mingling of the superior white race with the genes of minorities. In a report published in 1976, it was revealed that between 1970 and 1976, 25% to 50% of Native Americans were sterilized, and a significant portion of these sterilizations occurred without the patient's knowledge, often during unrelated surgeries like appendix removal. In some cases, before performing surgeries on children, mothers were asked to consent to sterilization. If they refused, the child would be left to die. The land of freedom, the birthplace of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, saw events unfold in this manner, and this movement would inspire another country, Germany. Not only Germany, but also countries like Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, China, Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, Iceland, Norway, and more witnessed similar practices during this period. However, Germany stands out as one of the most comprehensive and horrifying examples. Let's take a look at some fascinating connections here. Let's delve into the background that led to the Jewish Holocaust. The origins of this matter lie in America, particularly in the state of California. Hitler even praised the American practices in his book Mein Kampf. We also know about his admiration for the Spartans. I'll discuss this shortly. However, it was the Americans themselves who brought this mindset and ideology to Germany. The institutions in California began sending all their research and studies to Germany in the 1930s. In 1927, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology, Human Heredity and Eugenics was established, focusing on physical and social anthropology, along with genetic research. Guess who supported the establishment of this institute? The American Rockefeller Foundation played a major role in its creation. Rockefeller again? Yes. And that's not all. Have you heard the name Joseph Mengele, the dreaded doctor known as the Angel of Death at Auschwitz? But before Mengele was assigned to Auschwitz, he conducted numerous experiments and research funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. He gained the necessary experience through these horrifying experiments before embarking on his later atrocities. Connections. Hitler's familiarity with eugenics comes from his time in prison. Hitler and his Nazi party attempted a coup in 1923, and he was wounded during the attempt and fled. He was captured shortly thereafter and sentenced to 5 years in prison for treason. Spending only 9 months in jail, Hitler decided that if he was to come to power, it would be through strategy rather than force. He shaped Nazi propaganda during this time, even writing his famous book Mein Kampf. Concepts like racial purity and eugenics were central to his propaganda. He even had an unpublished second book where he mentioned the Spartans. To my mind, Sparta is the first original Volk state, and if I were to utter the word Volk state, I would say it is what we Germans still are, or at least what we should become. The whole thing would be no good if it was not supported by the sound instinct of a healthy race. Sick, weak children would be set out to die. In such a case, I believe the best thing that one could do would be to hasten their death. Here too, the state must act as the guardian of a millennial future. After his release from prison, Hitler's skillful manipulation through rallies and propaganda managed to persuade the masses that the Aryan race was superior, ultimately securing an overwhelming majority in power. Eugenic practices were immediately put into motion. For this purpose, the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring Law was officially initiated in 1933. According to this law, individuals who should not reproduce based on a list of genetic disorders created by a genetic health court needed to be reported by doctors. Doctors who failed to make this report were severely punished. After this law was enacted, around 400,000 people were forcibly sterilized. Sterilization was soon seen as an inadequate and slow method, of course. To expedite racial purification, institutions like the Hartheim Euthanasia Center were established. Don't let the term euthanasia fool you. In these centers, mentally ill individuals with genetic diseases were killed without their consent. Approximately 200,000 people were killed through euthanasia practices. Later, before the establishment of gas chambers as we know them, patients were loaded onto buses and exhaust gas was pumped in to comply with the law's requirements. Subsequently came gas chambers, concentration camps, and eugenic laws, along with various tortures, leading to the deaths, incineration, and experimentation of millions of people. You know the story. While convincing the public, there was a recurring argument. Why should healthy and strong individuals perish in wars while burdensome, disabled and ill individuals are sustained? What's worse, the eugenics practices were being presented as highly scientific, accurate and logical, and the entire nation believed in them. Let's approach this scientifically then. Eugenics. Is it possible to improve the human gene pool? Yes, it's scientifically possible. Science doesn't dictate what should or shouldn't be done. Science is rational. It doesn't have a concept of good or bad. Scientifically speaking, yes, these practices could improve the human gene pool. However, a non-scientific factor comes into play here: ethics, moral principles. The fact that something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. The splitting of the atom is a perfect example of this. It led to incredible scientific advancements, but it also led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and the destruction of cities due to atomic bombs and nuclear weapons. In these cases, no one can blame science or the scientists who facilitated these developments. Eugenics is similar. It's possible, but how you use it is up to you. After World War II, inhumane eugenics practices have thankfully largely disappeared, but in the 21st century, a new face seems to be emerging: genetic engineering. Although eugenics practices have diminished, this approach still lingers in people's minds. For instance, Harvard professors Richard Herrnstein and Charles Murray state in their book, The Bell Curve: Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life. Criminals and the unemployed have lower intelligence levels compared to the general population average. Higher fertility rates occur in segments of society with lower intelligence. Since intelligence is primarily related to genetics rather than education and other environmental factors, this will lead to a society composed increasingly of lower intelligence individuals. Thus, preventing crime and unemployment becomes increasingly impossible. Just as there are differences in intelligence among different social groups, there are also differences among races. The most intelligent races are the Chinese and Japanese, followed by Europeans. In last place, with considerably lower intelligence, are Africans. If the poor are poor, it's primarily because they are less intelligent than the rich. We may pity them, but that doesn't change anything. In conclusion, social justice programs are nothing but wastefulness. Furthermore, because the poor have more children, they contribute to the spread of bad genes. It's quite clear that if aid is discontinued to poor blacks, everything will improve. We're seeing a scientific perspective here. We can't say anything about this. However, looking at it ethically, we can confidently say that the America of the 19th century and Nazi Germany's ideals haven't entirely disappeared. But sensible scientists are, of course, fighting strongly against this perspective. An example is Richard Lewontin, author of Biology as Ideology. He says, scientists begin not as scientists of life, but as social beings within a family, a state, a productive structure. They view nature through a lens shaped by their social experiences. Like the church of previous eras, science is a social institution that reflects and reinforces the dominant values of society in each historical epoch. You cannot abstract science from society, nor society from science. Science has no race, country, or ideology. Knowledge belongs to humanity, and it's the light of this knowledge that illuminates the world. With this video, we've embarked on a journey, I would say. There's so much I want to discuss within this framework, especially regarding genetic engineering, the gene map, and the possibilities of modern eugenics. So with this video, we've laid an introductory foundation for this topic. In the future, we'll turn our focus towards the future and explore this topic from various angles in a few upcoming videos. Stay tuned. And as always, thank you for being here. Much love.